Yay! Welcome, Aidan. Also, Dr. Kinsella. What would you prefer to be called today?
Aidan, absolutely. Aidan.
Cool.
Thank you.
That's what I thought. Just wanted to check. Yay! Well, I'm so happy that you're here with us today. And let's jump right in.
Okay, so excited to be here. Thank you.
Yay! I've been your patient for basically 3 years. And, I tell people that you changed my life. You basically changed how I relate to my body and how I relate to pain. And I was just stuck in this bracing, numbing, avoiding, just surviving mode. And slowly over time working with you, that changed. So, you've basically taught me a lot about how to relate to my body, including pain. And I know that there's so much that you're going to share with us today, but I really want to ask, what is sort of a central idea of your work or a central thesis to really introduce people to you and your work?
Awesome. Thank you. I loved what you said is, basically working with you has changed my life. It is the most common thing that people say about network care. And it's not because network care is some magic thing that is life-changing, but because it is the intention of the work. The work is designed to help your nervous system move from a state of bracing against change and resisting change, which is what we are wired to do when we're stressed, to redirecting the energy and the resources available in your body and in your being to adapt and to grow. And so people often say that, oh my God, my life has changed so much since I've been in your care. But that's your nervous system is designed to work that way. So when we can learn how to get our fingers on the dials of how we can optimize our own nervous system, then change is just what happens and what we feel like we can move through with more energy and more grace. So it's a big part of the care. But, really the thing I'm most passionate about for folks and that I get most excited and the thing I really want for anybody who comes through my doors, no matter what they're kind of coming in with, is to have this really deep change of how it is that they know and relate to their body and really discovering how much your body is trying to help you all the time. And that really the pain that we experience, the discomfort we experience, the ways in which pain and symptom and even emotional pain can disrupt our lives. It interrupts us. It gets in the way. And that's what's so frustrating about it is on purpose and is for you. And really what I would want everybody to know is that your body's trying to help you, always is trying to help you. And it's this great feedback mechanism and resource. And so when we can start to learn how to more fluently speak with our body and speak the language and understand the signals that we're getting all the time and partner with that and co-create with that, it's almost limitless what we're capable of.
I love that idea of speaking the language of your body, and that's central to my work as well. What are some signs that, your body is trying to speak to you and maybe, you're interpreting it as this is bad or I just don't want to feel this, but and obviously it's an array and it depends, but yeah, what are kind of signals or ways that our body is speaking to us?
Yeah, I think probably the one that's most important for us to talk about is pain, because there's all kinds of subtle ways all the time, but pain is kind of the loud one and the one that I think we all have some work to do usually around how we relate to that. So when we define pain as any uncomfortable experience that interrupts your life. So that might be a physical ow, or it could be an emotional flooding, or it could be a thought pattern that we loop in that's really painful. It could be a circumstance that you're dealing with that life gets interrupted. And so any uncomfortable experience interrupts your life. But really what happens when we have pain is that we immediately think, something's wrong. Probably with me. It's probably something wrong with me that I need to go figure out what it is and fix it so that I can go back to living my life. We are, and the reason that that's where we go with it is partly about how we're hardwired. We are designed to move away from pain. That's our basic survival system. You touch a hot stove, what do? Before thought, your instinct is to move away from pain. Mm-hmm. And we need that. That keeps our body alive. That's a survival mechanism. But that's all it is a survival mechanism. And really anything that's going to help us to thrive is going to involve increasing our capacity to be present, to breathe, to be conscious and aware of ourself and our surroundings and our sensations, independent of whether they're comfortable or not, right? So that reactive moving toward and away from pain, although we need that and we want to be informed by that, we've also have this incredible capacity to cultivate being able to be with those sensations as they come up, and then choose, is this discomfort that I need to lean into and move towards, because what's right on the other side of this discomfort is everything that I need or want, or the growth that's available for me right now? Or is this discomfort a signal that I need to do something different? And we've got to be able to stay with it long enough, breathe with it long enough to consider that. And that requires a different part of our brain to come online. So there's this like aspect of why we go, pain, something's wrong, probably with me, I got to figure out and fix it. There's an aspect of that that's our nervous system design that move away from pain like that really instinctively. But then that's really reinforced in the culture. So, and we could talk probably lots of ways about about the things that are kind of reinforced every day, all the time, both explicitly and implicitly, that really teach us to move to not connect with our bodies and with our sensations and with our discomforts. And then even just how our Western medicine system is designed and built is really about symptom relief, and it's about crisis care. And so there's often when we need help, when we're in pain and we are seeking help, often the messages we're getting are really about just reducing symptoms and not feeling. And a lot of people end up frustrated that there's not a deeper resolution of what's happening. And so I think that's the sort of fundamental challenge, is that shift in perception and belief and mindset about what pain means, that it doesn't always mean that something's wrong that needs to be figured out and fixed. And so what instead I want people to be able to experience when they have pain is much more curiosity. It's like, what is my body trying to tell me? Pain is this signal to stop and take inventory, and change is needed.
Yeah. And it makes sense that we evolved to avoid pain, because otherwise we might not live very long if we didn't have that ability. And I also see so many ways that our society requires us to numb and to not feel, so that we can be a good student and then a good employee. And I'm curious, I think there's two things that are coming up for me is we all know acute pain of you go through a big breakup, you stub your toe. What are some of the more subtle ways that we might experience this pain? The sort of essentially when we're chronically disconnected or we're chronically in survival mode, what does that look like?
I think it can manifest in a lot of different ways. So if we're kind of chronically disconnected, people feel fatigue. When people talk to me about feeling like just tired, or I feel like I'm not able to, I don't wake up feeling refreshed anymore. That can be a sign of that kind of disconnection, and particularly disconnected from not just our physical body, but also our emotional body. And that I think when we're feeling beings, and so as we're moving through our days and our lives, there's a lot we're experiencing emotionally, and if that's all kind of happening below the radar of our conscious awareness, it actually requires a lot actually to keep all that information below the radar. I think it was Gabor Mate in his most recent book, Myth of Normal, was talking about this analogy of trying to keep a helium balloon underwater. That the balloon is always trying to come up. And so our emotions are like that there's this input and feedback that's, again, designed for our survival to help move us. It's trying to come up all the time. So it requires an enormous amount of our energy. And that is very physical, too. It's not just in our mind and consciousness, but part of how we don't feel is to restrict our movement and our breath, and the way we hold our bodies and our posture. and to keep that kind of sense of stability of our reactivity creates a lot of tension. And so people can feel really exhausted, feeling tired, feeling like just like their life is getting smaller. And so that again can be very physical. Like I'm just not able to do as much with my body as I used to, or I get tired, or I get hurt more easily, or I'm not as flexible as I used to be. And then that can also just be like your bandwidth. I can't do as much. I get overwhelmed more easily. Seems like little things. All of a sudden, I can't do it. I can't focus as easily. I get distracted, overwhelmed. And then also chronic tension patterns. So that could be like a cyclical pain pattern that happens. It's not all the time, but it's sometimes, and it's like not clear. And I think a lot of people who end up in my office have that kind of relationship with a pain pattern. It's not the first time they've felt it. I'm not the first person they've reached out to try to see what's going on. They've maybe tried physical therapy, and they've tried different exercises or stretches, and they've maybe been to a more traditional structural chiropractor before. Maybe they've tried acupuncture. They've done different, lots of different things. And in each of those things, they've learned something, and parts of it have been helpful, but something's not resolving. And so that's another way that our pain is trying to get our attention, saying, hey, there's something that needs your attention. And sometimes that's really obvious. Like I've been weeding in the garden for 4 hours and my low back starts to hurt because I got to get up and move and stretch. But I can just as easily and very often be much more complex, that I've got to actually stop and take inventory of where I'm at in my life and what it is that I need and want, and where I may be out of alignment with who I am and what I'm here for. And that hurts. So, I think I said a lot there, but.
Yeah, no, it's funny when you were describing, particularly in that last part of like, when you have these patterns and you've tried everything, I'm like, oh yeah, you're describing me. That's exactly how I was right when I saw you. And I had just tried physical therapy for my shoulder pain, and it made it worse. And they told me, well, you might have to try medication. And I was like, I know that path is not going to be a good one. Like, let's not go down it. And, I remember how much tension my body held on a regular basis. And it took a while for it to fully soften. But then more recently, there was kind of this big emotional thing that happened. And what happened to my body, that shoulder pain and tension and kind of bracing came on. Yeah. And I've been in this place of like, okay, how do I support myself? And there's all these physical things that I know I could be doing. And yet I'm like, it's not actually a physical issue though.
Right.
And I know that if I roll it with a ball a bunch, I might aggravate it more. And so I think I'm curious about, what are some ways that we maybe make things worse, or we kind of turn up the volume on our pain and our problems by trying to fix ourselves and trying to like bypass what's actually happening through these healing modalities that, have benefits and do work to some degree, but it's kind of like how we're relating to it.
Yeah, that's a really, really important point, I think. And what's underlying that is whether we're moving away from ourselves or towards ourselves, ultimately. So it's so much less about technique that you use, and it's really more about, am I connecting or am I moving away from? And so, so back to kind of like, what is it that I hope that people really, like my ultimate wish for everybody I work with is that they shift that perspective of that when there's something hurting, that there's something wrong, I've got to get rid of it, instead to like, how do I connect more deeply with myself, with this sensation, with the experience I'm having, with my life, so that I can respond. So that can, so we can do a therapy ball into the muscle thing. And if we're doing that so I can more deeply connect with my body, it's going to have a very different impact than if I'm doing it to try to get rid of the sensation I'm having. And so it's not so much about, we can have all these different tools, but it's really more about what is the intention that I'm using it for. And that it takes time to develop that kind of relationship with your body. You know, most of us don't have that starting out. And when we're in pain, we want to get out of it. And that's okay too. It's both things. It's both like, how do I respond to this, but also gain from it and learn from it so that I have more wisdom on the other side of it, and I feel more empowered because I now know how to respond to this thing. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that I think we can have that awareness start to come on for a lot of people by the time they come in to work with me. And I think also with you, people have a sense that this isn't just some physical thing, because I've tried the just physical things to resolve and it doesn't resolve. So I know it's not just physical, but I think sometimes people can then feel judged, particularly by the Western medicine, that it's not physical, but it is very much in and of your body. So even though I maybe, like you were describing, like, oh, when I had this emotionally stressful moment, then I could feel all this shoulder pain. It's in response to my emotional reaction to something that's happening, but it doesn't mean it's just in my head or that it's not manifesting very real in my physical body. But it does require that in order for that to integrate or to come into more of a state of ease, it does require that I can make those connections. I can put these things together. And so the first part of when I work with people is just being able to start to feel their body. Because once we can feel our body and we have that ability to sense and observe where there's ease and where there's not ease, just being able to notice that, which sometimes is just a new practice for people, being able to just feel and notice, then I can start to notice how my body responds to different relationships, conversations, environments, foods I eat, thoughts I think. But we first got to get connected so that we can then get that wealth of information. And so even to get to that point that you got where you're like, wow, this whole shoulder thing came online in reaction to this emotional thing. Sometimes we're not getting that feedback yet because we have the experience of either it just feels tight all the time. So then I can't notice when it's reacting and when it's not. And so that, like, being able to feel my body first, and then being able to feel how it is my body is responding and reacting. What's the relationship between this tension and my day-to-day experiences?
Yeah. And if our kind of level of awareness is only in extremes of, like, I can feel when I feel really good and I can feel when I feel really bad, but like that gradient, I don't have a nuanced sense, then it makes so much sense why, like, we're not able to literally sense into those subtle shifts. And it absolutely does take time. And I just love, I also, to jump back to something you said kind of in the middle of, the truth that even if something has an emotional root, it still has a real physical manifestation. I fucking hate the term psychosomatic because it implies that it's all in your head. And that if you simply get your thinking right, then the symptoms will just go away. And yet we know from so much research about trauma that it's independent of behaviors. Experiencing trauma can lead to things like diabetes and heart disease and mental health disorders, and all these things. And it's just so gaslighting. And I definitely felt that shame before of being like, this is my fault. Like, there's something I need to be doing, which then adds that extra burden on the tools of this like, please fix me. So thank you for naming that.
Yeah, and I think, there is a point, and often the point when people are reaching out for help, there's a point where we do need help from outside of ourselves. But really what I want to see for people is that help converts into empowerment. So when somebody comes and they're, learning how to connect in their body and their nervous system, that once they learn how to do a piece of it, it's something that they really own. It's not something that they are going to need that same outside help for that same result. That it's like, get that outside help for that result. They didn't know how to do that for themselves. And then they can continue to reach out, because we need each other. We need witnesses, we need guides, we need mentors, we need tools. But kind of go back to what we were saying before of if it's is this tool something that's kind of keeping me in this more disconnected or disempowered relationship with what's happening? Or is it something that's making me feel like I'm better prepared for the next thing that comes along? Or when this discomfort arises again, it's like, oh yeah, I know what to do with that and with myself. And so I feel more and more empowered instead of lost and judged.
Yeah. And, that brings me to a question I wanted to ask about energy states. And, there's kind of different categories. And I think often having a map and being able to say, here's where I am on the map, and it makes sense why I'm feeling this way, can be really grounding to our mind, which wants a reason and maybe wants to know, like, well, which tool do I use now? Mm-hmm. Can you speak to the different energy states?
Yeah. So energy state is a term that we use to talk about really kind of from a physics perspective, how much available energy there is in the system of me in a given moment. And when I can start to pay attention to the amount of available energy and what that feels like, which I'll describe a little bit more, so there's more clarity about what that means, then I know, like you're saying, I know which tool to use when, and I can adjust my expectations to meet what I have the resources for in a moment, and can recognize that as a living system, I am in flux. And there's moments when I have more energy and there's moments when I have less energy. And so how do I start to be able to pay attention to that, to recognize what it feels like in my body, in my emotional awareness, in my thinking, thoughts, focus, my capacity to observe myself in my life. What's the experience like at different energy states? So like you're saying, I can kind of map myself. And then I know from that place what it is that works and what it is that I need. And so there's 4 categories to the energy states. So energy poor, which means there's just not enough energy to run a whole life on it. Okay, so when we're energy poor, we feel exhausted, we feel overwhelmed, we feel reactive, we feel hopeless, we feel helpless, we feel powerless, we feel frustrated, we feel, all these things that are like, I'm trying to just get through my day, and I don't actually have enough energy to run my life on. And when we're in that place, that's painful. That is pain. Okay. And so here we go. Something's wrong, probably with me. I got to figure it out and fix it. And when we can shift that, is what's so powerful about looking at the energy states like a map. We can just go, I just don't have enough energy. We stop pathologizing ourselves so hard, mm-hmm. And like into this like big diagnosis process with ourselves. And we can just recognize I need energy. That's energy poor. Energy neutral means I have enough. I have enough energy to run my life on, but I don't have any extra. There's no energy for growth really, or for change, or for taking a risk. And energy neutral, that enough place is where we spend most of our time energy wise. And it's actually, that's okay. It's good. It's an efficient place to be. And really for people, it's more about learning how it is they move from that state into more energy. Okay. And then energy rich means I have enough to run my life on, and there's extra. There's room for learning. There's room for taking a risk. There's room for doing something new. There's energy to actually hold complexity, to think about what my experience is and what it could be. Or what my experience is and what somebody else's might be, and how we could co-create or collaborate. So that energy rich place is a highly creative place. Okay? And then energy super rich is when we become a source of energy. So energy super rich states are love, gratitude, feeling deeply connected, whether that's to your spiritual practice or to nature or to humanity in either small ways, like a soul to soul connection with another human being, or in a larger way. But when we are really part of something so much bigger. And so that's a super energy rich state. So when we can recognize that there's this range that we have available to us, and on any given day, we could feel all of that. And it can also sometimes be part of why maybe we have a symptom or a pattern that we're dealing with, that some days it feels one way and some days it feels another. And we're trying to map that and figure that out. Like, how come some days I wake up and it hurts and some days I don't? And sometimes if we can start to pay attention to what our energy state is, and we start to really learn and map that even symptoms or different patterns exist, they live at a certain threshold of energy. And so when I have more energy than that, I don't experience that as a problem in the same way. And then when I'm in that specific energy state, then that seems really loud. And so being able to kind of first recognize, and just even asking the question is really valuable. What's my energy state? Do I have enough energy to do this day, this moment? Or do I feel like, not quite enough? Do I have enough, but I don't feel like I have room for more? Or do I feel this like generative, creative, or, deeply interconnected place? And it's just trying to be able to recognize those moments, and even mapping for yourself. When is the time that I felt each one? It doesn't have, you can do that kind of looking back too. Like, like this is what that feels like. This is what that feels like. So you start to get to know that. Then it's easier to recognize it as you're moving through.
Yeah. Yeah. And mapping, like, what were you doing? Who were you with? What were the things that came before? Yeah. What was possible?
And you can start to learn, you can see how it is that what tends to cost us energy and what moves us down, but then also seeing and learning how do I fuel myself? How do I move from when I'm in an energy poor place? How is it that I can connect and move from poor to neutral? And then when I'm in a more neutral place, which is going to feel like more work, it's a more effortful place, how can I shift from that into energy rich? And it's a different skill set. So what gets us from poor to neutral is a really different skill set than what gets us from neutral to rich. And so being on the map where you are helps us identify what tools we need. And one of the other things I want to say about an energy poor state is our body starts to break down. So we do experience a loss of function because you don't have enough energy to run your whole life on.
Yeah.
And so you're going to start to see that first in the body, where the body will, and this is kind of coming back to what I'm saying, that everything your body does, it does for a reason. Like, your body's not, this is like a kind of a fundamental perspective that I hold. Like, there's nothing wrong with your body ever, even if you've got a whole disease process happening. It is an attempt to adapt, but often reflective of not enough energy to live the life you're living. And so pain comes along, and dysfunction and disease and symptoms comes along to interrupt the life you're living. And that's what's so frustrating about it. But that's really also important. And so when we can respond to pain in this way, where we stop and take inventory and recognize, I need to do something different now. And it's urgent. And the more intense and disruptive the pain, the more urgent the call from your body. And I think it's not that we don't stop and take inventory, because we are often interrupted. I can't do the things I was doing because of the pain I'm having, but we tend to take a really narrow inventory. So for example, if I have shoulder pain, I'll think, well, I'll take inventory of the shoulder. Like, what have I done with my shoulder? Did I sleep funny? Did I lift something? And I'll only think physically, and I'll only think locally. And really, that the more we can allow ourselves to stop and take as wide of an inventory as possible. And so energy state is one of those ways that we could be taking, well, how's my energy state right now? Or what's it been leading up to this? And what's happening in my body, in my life, in my emotions, and what tension needs my attention right now? So we can take that wider inventory. We're almost always going to discover something that if I could address that, then change starts to unfold and emerge. So another thing I like to think about when there's pain is, what is this getting started for me that otherwise I wouldn't start?
Yeah. I mean, that's like the concept that we don't change until we hit rock bottom. And so it's like, okay, like what is this forcing me to reckon with?
Yeah.
And what is this catapulting me into that I wouldn't if I was in that energy neutral state? Because it's comfy.
It is comfy.
It's familiar.
Yep, exactly. Even if it's less than awesome.
Yeah.
Our nervous system likes familiar. We our most basic human need is for certainty. And that's not wrong. That's important. However, you can meet the need for certainty with a breath. And so often we're spending so much of our energy trying to manage and control our environment and our relationships and how people perceive us and what I'm going to feel throughout a day, or not, spending all this energy trying to manage and control my life and my experience and people's experience of me so that I can feel more certain of things. And so, but when we can start to make that 99 billion times more efficient, that drive, that need for certainty, we can't just go, okay, I'm just not going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Because we need it. But we start to meet it with something that's like, just takes a second, So being able to like take a moment to breathe, put your hands on your body and breathe, quenches that need for certainty, and then allows us to experience so much more richness in our life and so much more creativity in our life, because creativity requires some level of uncertainty.
Yeah. Oh, and something I only really recently like fully embodied, which is something that you had talked about for a while, is like this idea of like really fiercely having your own back and like knowing that you can meet whatever is going to happen. And, through some of the tools I've learned through you, but other somatic tools, but just being like, I can comfort myself through any uncertainty, any challenge, and I can't control the outcome. I can't control the other person, but I know that I can comfort myself, and I can like hold my tender little one that's freaking out. And it doesn't mean I'm not in pain, and it doesn't mean that things don't feel like it's utter chaos. But yeah, that practice is like breath, and that basically any somatic practice where you're meeting yourself helps you be like, okay, like this is my center. I'm going to get through this. And I really hear that in what you're saying.
Yeah, it is. That's so empowering because it makes you so much more unstoppable. Really, what holds us back so often in life is that we're afraid to feel something. Or, and even if that afraid to feel something is afraid of somebody else around us feeling something and then feeling that, But so when any little bit that, or a lot of it that you take your time and your energy and resources and invest them in being able to become aware of your feelings, sensations, emotions, for your embodied experience, and then learning how it is that you can soothe yourself, like you said, and there's the soothing myself that looks like easing, and then there's the working with that I know you do a lot of in your practices too, of working with the discomfort or the emotion. How do I allow myself to be moved and move with this, so that as you start to deepen that, and you're like, well, I know what to do with fear. I know what to do with grief. I know what to do with anger. I know what to do with frustration. I know what to do with a sense of helplessness. I know what to do with overwhelm. I know what to do with uncertainty. Like as we have this greater vocabulary and dialogue and tools that we can use with our body and our emotions, our sensations, then if to pursue what I want, to know what I want, and to pursue what I want, or to take the risks required to deepen intimacy or to invest ourselves in our creativity, where we can move forward in a way that's so much more fearless because we're ready. We know, like you said, I know I have my own back. I know I'll have what I need in the moment that I need it. And so I can walk through life in a more trusting, more open, more generative way, because I'm not afraid to feel.
Yeah. Well, there's kind of two questions I have, and I'll let you pick which one you want to answer first. One is kind of, you mentioned having curiosity about pain and sensation, and like, how do we even begin to start to feel more and to get curious? But then the second is, I do want to ask about practices for when we're in, energy poor and energy neutral.
Okay.
Not necessarily a comprehensive list, and it's going to vary, but like, how do we meet ourselves there?
Okay.
And maybe shift.
Yeah, I think, will you repeat the first question?
Yeah, basically, like, how do we start to get curious about sensations and pain and signals from our body and essentially feeling more?
I think there's the like actionability of that, and then the generalness of it. So starting to even just cultivate a baseline of curiosity is really important. That there's kind of always more than meets the eye. In everything. So that's true about like a sensation in our body, as well as a person we think we know really well, or a new opportunity that's coming our way. Being curious about, like, what am I going to discover? I think we have a deep connection to that that's innate to us. If you ever hang out with babies and toddlers and kids, that just how fundamentally curious human beings are. We're curious to a default. We're curious to the extent that we will put ourselves in incredibly dangerous situations. We're deeply curious, and so reconnecting with that part of yourself and your capacity to be like in exploration and discovery. Like, like what's here for me? What's around the corner? What am I going to learn? What am I going to uncover? And that really connects back to this need for certainty that we have, that our sense of curiosity will kind of fade to the background or be more muted when we're really focused on creating certainty, because we don't want to think, what is it that I don't see yet? Like, because it's scary, like, what's around the corner? It's become more fearful versus exciting. So there's the kind of the general, like, reconnecting with and cultivating curiosity in general, so that then when you're in pain, you can apply it. But then in the like really actionable moment to moment, breath, because it's that quote, fear is just excitement without breath. The difference between being overwhelmed by the unknown and anticipating what we're going to discover is breath, in connection. And so breath is one way to connect, but it's ultimately, if I can be connected, then that frontal cortex of my brain that allows me to be curious and to be learning, that allows me to bring at least an energy-rich observe or perspective into the moment, comes online. One of my favorite physiological facts is that when we become stressed with fight or flight, 70% of your blood supply to the frontal cortex of your brain drains out of the frontal cortex of your brain. So when we have a moment of stress or pain or overwhelm, which really is like, I don't have the energy right in this moment to meet what life is asking of me. So there's a little moment of energy poor, that curiosity goes away. So if we are like, even just practice being like, ooh, what am I going to learn? We bring that back online. So that's one way to bring that back online. And in a moment we're feeling really dysregulated, that's going to feel outside of our reach. And so this is where then having your tools of how do I connect when I become disconnected? You're going to become disconnected. It's an important circuit breaker system that we have in the body. We need it. And it's not about not stopping that process. It's about being able to just more quickly reconnect when we become disconnected. And so many different tools and practices, but really being able to find a place on our body where I can touch that spot and feel the breath, feel the energy of the breath, feel the movement of the breath. It's like this little eye of the storm moment of peace that I can create for myself. It just brings your nervous system down. And then that makes this sort of curiosity and readiness to learn and discover and work with whatever is coming up for you in the moment more available to you.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, it's this catch-22 where when we're feeling curious, it's a lot harder to feel fear, and it pokes holes in our certainty of like, oh, well, I feel like this pain is so big that it's too scary to feel. Or if I start to feel it, it's going to overwhelm me, or I'm always going to feel this way, or whatever. And yet, like you said, it is hard to get curious when you are in a really energy poor, dysregulated state. And yeah, you know, there's so many breathing practices out there. And it's like, you know, I don't think that there's necessarily one right breath, but breath and touch, lengthening your exhales. And then once you're like that more dropped in, even if it's 5 to 10%, I think that's something that I see is there's this yearningness to like be completely regulated. And it's like, okay, what if I can just soften a little bit and meet that and celebrate that and then get curious from that space and like trust that the softening is going to continue. And, you know, all like, it makes sense that maybe we've parts that soften quicker and we've parts that need more time. And like, what if like they're softening in their own perfect time?
Exactly.
And that curiosity is going to be this unfolding process.
Absolutely. And I think what you're speaking to of, can I let just a little bit be enough and let it build, you know, part of that kind of all or nothing way we get is again, it's about when we're stressed or overwhelmed or hurting, that need for certainty. So we want it to be all the way. You know, that it's a little bit in the right direction, but it's not all the way, isn't sure enough. And so, but, you know, if we're aware that that's at play and can give ourselves permission to let a little bit be enough and let it build and let it build and let it build, it does build, you know, because because we're living systems, we are moving towards growth all the time. You don't have to tell a plant to grow. You don't have to tell a human being to grow. We're all moving towards growth all the time. And in any little bit of energy that's liberated for growth, the body will use it that way. It's just innate to us. It's not something you have to think about or regulate. And so what I see often for people by the time they come in for care, they've been on a little bit of a downward spiral. So, for example, something stressful happens in their life and they have a little less energy. Because they have a little less energy, they're maybe not making as healthy of choices. And then because they're not making as healthy of choices, they have even less energy. And so then they stop doing the things that really support them, or they don't have the energy to connect with people, and so they feel more isolated. So there's this downward spiral that happens. And when you can start to allow even just a little bit to be enough, you're starting to flip the direction of that. Where if I have a little bit of a connection, then I make a little bit different choices, and then I have a little bit more energy the next day. And so then I am able to start to pick up some of the things that I put down that I know feed me and help me. And so then I start this upward spiral that even just so super, super simple, taking 30 seconds, 90 seconds to connect can change the direction of that spiral that's happening for people. We have so much power. Right in this moment, in a breath, in your fingertips, to really shift that trajectory.
Yeah. And I admittedly haven't seen the research firsthand, but I've heard it cited that to create new neural networks, it's not about doing something just completely different. So like you get triggered and you do the different response, but it's about going down that old path and then changing ever so slightly. And then over time, you're rewriting that path to over time directly go a different way. And so, yes, we have this yearning to do it differently, but it's really those subtle shifts and those subtle meeting ourselves. And in the beginning, it's absolutely just awareness, like you've talked about, of just like, how can I just notice? And sometimes it's like, I'm noticing that this is happening and I'm going to choose to numb out because that's actually like, that's where I'm at.
Yep.
And I'm grateful for, you know, some of the support you gave me around when I would go back and forth being like, God, I keep smoking weed and I'm so frustrated. And I remember you were like, well, like, is this actually a good time to quit or not? Because you're not that resource. And I was like, oh, you're right. You know what? It is serving me. And I'm going to focus on adding more things in rather than taking away some of the things that are supporting me, even if they're quote unquote maladaptive.
And this is where that, like, being able to kind of map yourself on the energy state list is helpful, because the things that get us from poor to neutral, this was your second question, and the things that get us from neutral to rich are different, and what does some of those things look like? So all the things that we do to neutralize are ultimately things we do to comfort ourselves. And so those can look like taking a bath, taking a walk, taking a rest, putting your hands on your body and breathing, watching Netflix, like dancing. What are the things that you do to soothe yourself? And all of those things will have like a wavelength or an amount of time, or a kind of amount of it that will bring you, they will add energy. They do bring us from poor to neutral. They help stabilize us when we feel like we're, there's a hole in the bottom of the bucket and it's leaking out. But doing that same thing longer then can start to then be deadening, no matter what it is. Even meditating can help balance us, but then it can also, we can use it to disconnect. So it's coming back to that. Like, it's not the tool, but it's the timing of the tool and the intention of the tool. So recognizing, like, if I'm trying to get from poor to neutral, then I may have a whole bunch of things that I use there. But then when it's time to get myself going and activated from a stable, neutral, comfortable place into a more alive and energized place, more of those things is not going to help. It's actually going to have the opposite effect. And so one way to think about that is, when I'm in an energy poor place, I need stability. And when I'm in a neutral place, I need instability. And so when people are, also too, when people are coming to your practice, to my practice, so that's one of the big things that we're discerning for them. It's like, at this point, we all need both tools. We need a stability toolkit and we need an instability toolkit. So that as life comes along, we are able to self-regulate more effectively and work with the energy that comes in our direction. And so that's also one way to think about the different tools, kind of categorizing your different tools. So what do I use to help stabilize and soothe and connect and create space and ease and regulate? And then I'm going to need a different set of tools for when I need to motivate, activate, inspire, energize, enliven myself.
Yeah.
And then that knowing kind of where you are in the moment is really helpful, because if you're trying to do you may have this great tool you love, but if you're doing in the kind of the funny timing, it won't work and it'll be really frustrating. And then we get disheartened about that tool or practice. And it's just timing.
Yeah, this is definitely a key thing I try to teach in my program, Body Language Lab, is like reading your body and being like, what do I need where I'm at now? What's the tool for when I'm anxious and triggered? What's the tool for when I'm completely exhausted and feel like I need a hug? And those are going to be different tools. And I'm also thinking about the idea of like having a balanced diet. If it's sort of like, like it's great to meditate, but that can't be the only tool. And like it might be beneficial to meditate 10 minutes every day, but if you did that 3 hours every day and that was the only thing, so it's sort of like, how do we also have balance of like, when in the evening I do more calming practices, but in the morning I want to tap into that energy and like ride the rhythms within a day, a week, a year, a season of life. And and
getting to that place where we're a curious researcher about ourselves and our body and what we need, like, ooh, what works?
Yeah, totally. So I'm sure it's very nuanced, but what are some of those tools for when we need that good instability to sort of catapult and energize?
Anything that makes you feel alive, and the more you can engage your body in that, the better. And so certainly there's like books we can read and podcasts we can listen to, and things that will kind of inspire us, that help us come alive that way. But how is it that I bring that through my body? So I love dance. I think dance is a great way, because music helps us connect emotionally, and then is an opportunity to move your body in a way. So that can be a really great way to bring aliveness and that kind of destabilizing way. And then doing new things, like that's another way to think about like bringing intentional instability into your system. And so doing new things with my body. So maybe it's being willing to disrupt some of those things that I do. Maybe I have a yoga practice and that has helped me come from stressed to regularly regulated place. And it's something I have. So back to what you were saying of, I don't need to like go out and learn how to be a surfer, and that's my new thing I do, but like, how can I bring that little change into my regular practice? It starts to take me in a totally new direction, So trying something somatically new so that your body feels confused and Confusion's a really great state in the body because it means we have to learn something new. And so creating that kind of instability somatically is really powerful to disrupt neutral and into something that's more generative and more creative.
Yeah.
So two simple things, but anything that's gonna, and I think it's also a way we can, just like I was saying, to start to relate to the energy states. You can kind of look back in your life and like, oh yeah, what's a moment that felt energy poor, and what's one that felt neutral, and what are those moments, so I can start to recognize them. We can also do that around when are the moments I feel the most alive. What are the top 10 things that totally turn me on that are not sexual, but that are just like I come to life in that. What is making a list of those things, so you start to recognize the patterns that are there for you to discover about how it is you can bring yourself into a more alive state, or start to make the little subtle changes that you align with that, so that more of your day is spent that way.
Yeah. And to build off your idea, so you could like make a list of top 10 times you felt most alive, and maybe intentionally, not just those like peak moments of, going to like Yosemite, for example.
Right.
But some also maybe more mundane, or if you can only think of peak ones, great. And then identify like, what did that feel like? What were the emotions? What was in my body? And then kind of go down another level and be like, great, what are ways that I can bring that on? Both that are maybe those bigger, like I have to go on a trip or I have to book a ticket or whatever. And then what are those more subtle ways that are maybe just changing my attention, or maybe intentionally doing something, but it's not overly effortful. It's available within my city and where I live. And
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that process of reviewing is really important, especially as you're learning to be aware of yourself in these new ways, or learning to be aware of your emotion or your body, that sometimes like in the moment going through our day that feels out of reach because there's so many other things you're paying attention to, but you can have a small practice that at the end of the day you can review, like, when was a moment that I really felt alive today, and when was a moment that I was really struggling today, and just start to like, what was I focused on, what was happening around me, what was I doing with my body, what was I doing with my thoughts. So we can go in that review process, even if you weren't super conscious in the moment. You can become conscious after the fact. And that's, there's like this deep self-retrieval we do when we do that. And there's endless beautiful information that we can apply next time. It's like, oh yeah, I start to notice if I track that over a couple of days, that the moments that I tend to feel crappy in the day were like, I was, what was I doing with my body? Like I wasn't really moving, or it was like, always after I'm dealing with this part of my project, or, we start to really recognize, and then we can start to see where we might be able to make little changes that make it more effortless because we're supported by our life to be in a more resource state.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also want to name that can be really hard when we're energy poor. And so those stabilizing practices that are just providing comfort are amazing. And, I know there's a meditation you've sent me, but even just visualizing a time when you felt maybe not those peak joy, awe experiences, but comfort and connection. And that's a way that we can bring that on online for us, even if we're not experiencing it. And sometimes a nuance of like, sometimes that can also make it feel further away. So like to discern for yourself, is this going to comfort? Is this going to make me sad that I'm not there? But I think this all goes back to your curiosity piece of like, what am I feeling now and what do I need? And how can I not make it wrong? And like, if my own support could be like a blanket or a hug, like how would I do that without any pressure to drastically change?
To be anywhere than right where I am. And yeah I think you spoke so beautifully just now to how important it is to recognize, which skill set do I need right now? The thing that's going to bring more life. If I'm in that energy poor place, the things that are going to activate and bring more life probably are going to make me feel like I'm failing.
Yeah.
They're too many steps away. So I'm going to need the thing that Comfort stabilizes, helps me connect.
Yeah.
And be right here, and let this be enough. And that actually those other tools are for more when I feel like I'm in the enough place, but hungry for more.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't necessarily want to fully open this can of worms, but I think that's why manifesting can feel so challenging when we're in energy poor states, because it feels so far off. It's not, our body's not able to like dwell in the possibility of it. And then it just hurts.
You don't have the parts of your brain online that do that, and the energy state required. It's an energy rich process. So you think like it's 2 steps away. So how do I get from poor to neutral? And then that could be a great thing to get from neutral to rich. But yeah, certainly will just ultimately make you feel like you're failing. When we're in a more energy poor place, and we're trying to be 2 steps away from where we are. It's really painful.
Well, my radiator has been hissing on and off. I'm not sure if you can hear it.
I heard it almost sounded like a tiny kettle in the background.
Yeah.
Just a little,
I'm
really
like,
faint.
Are you? Yeah, it's kind of, anyways. So, one thing that I am asking a lot of my somatic folks is if there's a practice or kind of a key, something that essentially you can guide us on now that someone could do on their own. And Absolutely. I know we kind of discussed this a little bit, but yeah, is there a practice that you want to guide us on now?
Yeah, I would, there's a series of hands, using your own hands on your body with breath and energy and attention exercises that we do as part of the care with network spinal chiropractic. And it's called somato-respiratory integration, or body breath integration, these tools. And so the basics of that is so powerful. We can just do that together right now. Anybody listening can follow along. And so what you'll do is you'll bring one hand on top of the other, and you'll bring those 2 hands to your upper chest. And then with your hands there on your upper chest, and this is intentionally not on the throat and not on the heart, but kind of on that flat spot in between. And that's because it's a more neutral place. Like throat and heart are more, they're energy centers, and they're also more emotional. So this kind of flat, neutral place on the ribs is a good place to start. What you do is close your eyes. You're going to breathe in your nose and out your mouth. And you're just going to take a couple breaths in this place, in your nose and out your mouth, directing the breath and the movement and your energy and attention under your hands. Just seeing what it's like to breathe here. Is this a place that you can feel and connect with, or does it feel hard to breathe there? Once you get a sense of that spot, the second place is right where your ribs open. Right here. One hand on top of the other in that spot. So the top part of my thumbs is on the bone, and then the pinky side is kind of on the belly. And just taking 2 breaths, 3 breaths there in your nose and out your mouth. And then noticing, is it easier to connect and breathe here? Does it feel more available? Or is it more work than the first one? And then the third spot is right over your belly button. And same idea. Taking a couple breaths in your nose, out your mouth. Feeling the movement, the rise and fall of the belly, the energy there, breath there. Just seeing how this one ranks, if it's easy or more work. And then bringing your hands to whichever of the 3 felt the easiest. So for me, that was the upper chest. And so just scanning, just checking in, taking 2 or 3 breaths in each of these places and looking for which one is the most connected already starts to regulate and change your nervous system. Because when we're in a stress state, we are scanning for what could go wrong. We're scanning for pain. We're scanning for what doesn't work. The nervous system scans 4 times a second. Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Right? So by placing our hands on our body and paying attention to what's happening, breath, movement, energy, and which one feels the easiest, and finding that, and then coming to whichever one, even if it's relative ease, even if they're all kind of hard, but one of them is easier than the others, it's that kind of spiral thing we're talking about starts to change the direction where the system starts to seek more ease and build on it. And so you can really ground and center and stabilize, even if you're in a really overwhelmed moment like that. And the other thing I'd say is that these three places are where we teach it first, because they're easy to feel breath and movement with the respiration because it's on your torso, but you can do this anywhere. So it could be that you put your hands over your eyes and take a couple breaths, and that's where you feel more ease. It could be that you kind of wrap your arms around yourself, like kind of like a hug, and your hands are here. It could be that you place your palms on the top of your thighs, on your lap. So just know that you can use any part of your body. It's just easier to kind of feel breath movement and energy in these places. And then the second layer, so even just that, just checking in with the three, seeing where is ease available, and then bringing your hands to wherever ease is available for a couple of breaths is very grounding and stabilizing. Then to take that a step further, you can go back and forth between the place that's most connected and the place that's least connected. So for me, the most connected, easiest, most effortless was the chest, and more work was the middle one. So what that would look like is taking 2 breaths. So whichever one, Jaclyn, for you was the easiest, taking 2 breaths there. And then moving your hands to whichever one was the most work. And then when you touch that spot, we're just going to acknowledge it with words. Like, sometimes I get so disconnected. So even if you're all by yourself, you'd say that out loud. Sometimes I get so disconnected. And take 1 breath there. And then come back to the easiest one. And you can repeat that cycle 1, 2, 3 times, where you start with where the ease is, do 2 or 3 breaths in the easy spot, and then 1 breath in the place that was the hardest to connect with a statement. Sometimes it feels like, sometimes it seems like. And so a good way to start is, sometimes I get disconnected, just acknowledging that, in that place it's harder to feel. But then you can also fill that in with any statement. So things that are like, sometimes I feel overwhelmed. Sometimes it feels like nothing works. Sometimes it feels like this is never going to end. Another really powerful thing to do is when you touch that place that's harder, just imagining if it could speak, what it would say. So that's like a little bit more advanced as you're practicing this. Just recognizing a place that's disconnected is great to start, and acknowledging it. Sometimes I get disconnected. But then as you deepen this practice, you can use the place there where you have connection to start to tune and regulate the places that are struggling. And so when you touch that place that's not as available, and if it could speak, what could it say? And be amazed at what will come up and bubble, just trusting what your body will reveal to you. And sometimes you're like, wow, I didn't know I was feeling that way, because your body is so intelligently protecting you from anything that might feel like too much. So when we can find a grounded, connected place and then go hunt for those things that are kind of wrapped in disconnection, and go like, wow, I'm going to peel back that layer and feel that all this tension drops out of your body. One of the ways I describe it to people when it's new is, I don't know if you've ever had the experience when you're upset about something and maybe you're just not sharing it with anybody yet, but you run into somebody who knows you really well and they take one look at you and go, oh my God, are you okay? You like burst into tears. Okay. It's like that for our body. Our body will tighten physically, structurally, mechanically, will hold around feelings and sensations and experiences that are uncomfortable. And so when we go and touch that place that's tight or inflexible or it's hard to breathe in, and acknowledge, oh yeah, sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes I don't got it. Sometimes it feels like everyone's out to get me. Sometimes it feels like I'm so unlovable. Then the body goes, oh, okay, you can see, I don't have to protect you from that anymore. And there's this unbinding of energy. And it's not that felt experience has much energy, but there's lots of energy being spent kind of in the wrapping around that to protect you from that sensation or feeling. So when we go in and go, oh yeah, I see that, it feels like that sometimes, then all that energy that was kind of protecting that is liberated. And so this is a really powerful way when we're in an energy poor place or we're struggling and it's an energy crisis. We need energy. We can liberate the energy that we already have that's being spent in disconnection, then becomes available. And then that little upward spiral starts to happen where I have a little more energy. So I choose to make myself a salad for lunch instead of call DoorDash. And then I have a little bit more energy and I go to bed earlier, and then I wake up feeling more refreshed and I feel more positive. And so, that spiral starts to happen, and you can change that just with your own hands on your body.
Wow. Yeah, I muted myself during that. Wow. Thank you so much. Yeah. The practice is so simple and yet so potent. And I can really, every time I feel the difference and I feel how there's more breath and my body's like, yes, thank you. And hearing you explain, it's just like, right. We spend so much time managing, trying to not feel it, that when we're actually just like, this is what's happening. The release from being like, I don't have to hold anymore. It's still happening, but I don't have to
But I feel better in the face of it. The only other thing I'll say is that I strongly recommend practicing that a little bit every day.
Yeah.
Because when we are then in the moment of stress, like often right in the moment of stress, we're not as capable of it. We don't feel like even if this is a tool that's going to make me so much better, it can feel really hard to reach for that in that moment. But if this is something you're doing every day and it takes, a couple seconds or minutes to do, a couple minutes to practice, then it feels more available to you in that moment of stress. So I recommend it in times of transition. So before you go to bed, or when you wake up before you get out of bed, or when you're done work and you're transitioning out of your work day into the rest of your life, or you've just spent time with somebody and you're transitioning to spend some time alone, or vice versa. You've been on your own and you're about to go meet people. In those transitions, this is a great time to practice this exercise, because what you're doing is not only familiarizing yourself with that, but you're training your nervous system that in transition, which means in uncertainty, I tune to where there's resource in my body. It's like a major superpower when you create that. So you're teaching your body. And then what happens is then in a moment of stress or uncertainty, you've already built that pathway. Then it's going to be, your body's going to be saying, oh, turn to me for this, turn to me for this. And it's going to be a lot easier then to reach for that, versus when we haven't cultivated that. Then when we're in the trying to get out of the stressful, discomfort experience, it's really hard to go, okay, now I'm going to connect. That's kind of going against the instinct. And so when you build it a little bit from a more neutral place, it's then easier to do it when it's hard.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. Are there any last things you want to share? We covered a lot.
I don't think so. We covered a lot. And I think that's it.
Yeah. Well, you're based in San Francisco. How can people work with you if they're curious about that?
If they're curious about that, great question. So I would direct them to the website, which is vervewellnessstudio.com, and they can read a little bit more about the practice. There's a short video. And then anybody who's new to us starts with a phone consult, and those are free of charge. And you book those through the website. There's a book a call, and it's a 20-minute conversation with me to see where you're at and what you're seeking, and whether network care can be a useful tool. And so certainly that's something that's available to anybody that was watching this that is local to San Francisco and maybe interested in coming into the practice. But even if you're not local to San Francisco and you're curious about network, or curious about ways in which you might be able to deepen what you're learning here in our conversation, I'm available for those phone consults. And so happy to talk to people, and often can connect people with practitioners who are doing the work that I do in other parts of the country, other parts of the world. So certainly feel free to use use that as a resource.
Thank you. Well, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jaclyn. So good.